Good evening. It's Wednesday evening, and we're beginning our experience 3, Ride Out the Storm with Compassion. Ride out with the storm with compassion. Today I had someone ask me, why are we talking about riding out the storm? Is this like a passive experience that as we go through the storm, we're just trying to get through it? Or are we struggling? Or are we fighting against the waves? What are we doing in this storm? And I began to reflect, of course, that maybe this needs a little bit more explanation. I may have not explained my concept here well enough for you to understand, but let me bear my thoughts a little bit here as we get started tonight. When we're going through this times of life transitions, times when things are really get tough and we've got a lot of things going on, our emotions are heightened, our stress is high, we may be going through a fear or flight or fright or a freezing sensation. And this to me is like the storms of life that come and they get worse and they get calm and then they get worse. And we have these periods of time in our life that sometimes we really struggle. And my hope with this series of teachings and sharing an experience, my hope is that I will be able to equip you and I'll equip myself at the same time with the energy, with the self-compassion, with the self-awareness, with the balance, the calm, with the resilience and grit, and with hope to ride out this storm, to ride out these circumstances and to keep on going. Not just ride along and say, okay, we're just having a really tough time right now, but no, to be able to ride out the storm, to keep on going, to go through all these circumstances and difficulties with purpose, with focus. So tonight, as we get started, rather than sharing another story from my life, I want to first review just slightly, very lightly, our last 2 nights. A short review of self-awareness and balance. Out of this self-awareness evening, I picked out one series of things that I thought were important and that really touched me and maybe set the stage for tonight. The 4 capacities of personhood. We are people and we all have the ability to think and to reason. This is where we use our mind and we see with our mind. We have the ability to choose and set direction. This is where our soul and our mind do the logic and the reasoning and the analysis. And sometimes we take risks and sometimes our emotions get involved and we choose to set a direction for our life. And then our heart gets involved with this awareness and with the seeing, and we can experience then deep longing and emotion. But as we segued into last night's teaching about balance, about equanimity, about calm and composure, I want us to remember that we can learn to express our emotions in a calm manner with a composed mindset. And there are some specific values in life. Perhaps you might want to choose one of these as something to latch onto for a while. Values that support this balance, this desire to be calm and composed and to rein in our extremes of our emotions. These 7 values are integrity, faith, a well-developed mind, well-being, wisdom, insight, and freedom. There's a lot to unpack in those values. And I encourage you, if you're thinking about what values that you want to incorporate into your life, or that maybe they are already an important part of your life, these 7 values are some good ones, some great ones to consider. So as we get into our main subject tonight of compassion and self-compassion, I'd like to first of all talk about what is compassion. I found a really great definition that I like very much. Compassion is the ability to understand the emotional state of another person or of myself. And then to go on to the next step, and that is to desire to alleviate the suffering and the pain and the problems that someone else may be experiencing. So let me reiterate that. Compassion is the ability to understand the emotional state of either another person or of ourselves. And then taking that another step to be able to desire to come alongside and to alleviate or reduce the suffering of another person. To do that, to understand the emotional state of someone else or our own emotional state, to take that next step to help necessitates that we have in our minds a focus on self-awareness, that we have a presence about ourselves that is aware of where we are in this space of the world, that's aware that we are in this process of encountering the emotional states of others and our own emotional state. And we can look at that with compassion rather than being reactive. So as we develop compassion for ourselves, we walk in more presence. We're more present and mindful about ourselves and about what is happening around us. And as we develop this loving kindness, this compassion for others, we realize that, first of all, we may need to work on our compassion, our empathy for our loved ones, because we all have a common humanity. We are all human beings, flawed, imperfect, with all of our warts and problems. We all have areas of life that were extremely imperfect. We have a common humanity with our loved ones. And another area of compassion is to extend loving kindness and compassion to ourselves. Because as we recognize that we need to understand the emotional state of other people around us to be able to be empathetic and alleviate their suffering, we also must understand our own emotional state so that we can work and find ways to alleviate our own suffering, to alleviate our own problems and our pain. And another way we can express this common humanity is by extending compassion and kindness towards those challenging and difficult people in our lives. We all have them. Some of them are actually family, with all of their imperfectness that rubs off on ours. But if we give ourselves space to be compassionate for ourselves, then it's easier, little by little, to be compassionate to the emotional state of someone else. I'd like to share a quick story here with you. This is not from my life this time, but it's a story about a young woman named Ella. And very young, Ella learned that expressing anger in her family was an unacceptable emotion. When she was a child, her parents punished her pretty severely whenever she expressed her anger. They would send her to her room or refuse to speak to her until she obeyed and behaved much more agreeably. So over a period of time, she learned how to be agreeable. She suppressed her anger. She avoided disagreements. She didn't assert her needs or wants, and she became very isolated because this anger that was within her made her feel rejected. She avoided being rejected by the people, not expressing it, but she also isolated herself. She was very worried about herself a lot of the time. She thought maybe she was not a nice person, that maybe she was a nasty person. She felt disappointed, often very disappointed and lonely and disconnected from those that she cared about. And the more she resisted expressing any of her anger, and the more she was afraid of it, the worse she felt. As an adult, Ella began to learn about self-compassion. When she worked with her therapist on this theme, she realized that given her history and the The environment with which she grew up, it was very understandable that she totally avoided anger. But she finally began to identify this emotion within her, the frustration, the anger, and also to notice the accompanying tension and heat that would build up in her body. And she began to accept that she did feel this. She began to realize that she didn't have to keep fighting this anger or avoiding it or criticizing and putting herself down because of it. She learned ways to handle her anger and still be compassionate and caring for herself. By slowing down and centering herself, validating these experiences of anger, she was able to gradually tolerate that feeling and deal with the anger in more normal ways. So in this story, we see a woman who, because of a childhood experience, and not just one time, but over a period of years, a response pattern was developed within her. Now, your response pattern is probably different, much different than mine. My response pattern in life is to be more assertive and more aggressive towards anyone in my family that talked down to me or tried to put me in my place. That's my personality. I was very assertive as a child. But this woman in this story was so squelched by the rejection of any expression of her feelings that she learned to just bottle them all up. These experiences that we all have had in life inform our adulthood, inform us now as people. And I'd like to explore very quickly why we feel what we feel. Why is it that we feel certain ways that we feel? There are emotions that we feel that signal to us that there may be some threat or danger. And those emotions may seem negative, but they're actually, in many instances, very positive for us because we may need to escape the danger. We may need to recognize a threat. And those emotions may be disgust or fear or anger. They could be an over-the-top anger because we're on a defensive mode and we realize that we're being threatened. And emotions that deal with loss of family members, loss of hope, loss of ability to do the things we might like to do, or great disappointments. Those emotions also inform our lives because they allow us to look at how we feel and to perhaps make the decision to find help. And those emotions are things like sadness, loneliness, remorse, and grief. Most all of us have experienced those at one time or the other. I shared, I believe it was the first night that for many years I was alone, and with my cat being really my only solace at times, I'm afraid I really overdid it sometimes, calling my mother in the evening and late at night and saying, "Mom, I'm so sad, I'm so lonely." And I kind of laugh about it now, but it was no laughing matter. Loneliness and sadness are considered today some of the most dangerous emotions, especially loneliness. There are many people who are living extremely lonely lives. They're isolated and result sometimes in even death because of that. Then we have the emotions that we all would love to feel. Emotions that tell us what we like, what we desire, what we want to achieve. And I know that some of you that are listening who are on the call tonight have many things that you're excited about. You have joy and desire and anticipation for new things in your lives. If you feel like doing any chatting and typing in the comments, please feel free. I'd love to have some comments. I'd like to have you both talk with me tonight, but maybe we'll do that on Saturday and have a few more people. But feel free to chime in with the chat. Actually, I forgot to get the chat window out, so I'll get the chat window out. So if you all want to say something, please do. Um, so emotions that are good for us, that we feel like, oh, these are the best emotions. These are the ones I want to feel all the time, are excitement, desire, joy, anticipation. And then we have the emotions that I like to feel when I'm being reflective and when I am meditating and focusing in on what's going on inside. And those are the emotions that help us feel soothed and calm and connected. Those are the emotions of contentment and of calm. So how we treat ourselves with all these different kinds of emotions is important. We might take these and say, okay, I want to avoid these that seem negative. I want to avoid fear and disgust. I want to avoid sadness and remorse and grief. And maybe we're like Ella, we want to avoid a specific emotion because there's such a negative connotation to that emotion that we feel like we can't feel that one. And I truly believe that when we shut down our hearts to one or two or several emotions that are just unacceptable, that we end up shutting down our hearts to a lot of different emotions. We become almost an ottoman. We almost become like one of these robots. We're not able to enter in empathy, compassion for others because we have no compassion for ourselves. We're not able to be loving and kind to someone else because we don't feel loving and kind to ourselves. We don't give other people a break because we don't give ourselves a break. We feel guilty about having any positive emotion because we feel guilty about having what are considered negative emotions. And when we are in that kind of state, when a woman is in that kind of state, honestly, it's very, very difficult to live life in that kind of state. Relationships go down the tube. Marriages break up. Relationships with children get damaged. I don't think any of us want to live like that, but we bring a lot of baggage into our lives. And honestly, it can take years to figure out what to do about all of our baggage. There's some elements of self-compassion that I'd like to talk to, and these may seem a little bit abstract, but I do believe that they may inform us and give us some food for thought. The first one is to look at the difference between self-kindness and self-indulgence. Some people believe that if we're kind to ourselves and compassionate with ourselves, we're just indulging ourselves. My father's mother, my grandmother on my father's side, was a person that felt that, and I believe she was brought up this way, that if she ever praised her children, if she ever affirmed them or said, you did a great job, wow, that's a good grade on that they would become haughty and proud and arrogant. So my father grew up with a dour, angry, frustrated father, a mother who was very unhappy and manipulated a lot with her pretend avoidance, or excuse me, her pretend illnesses. She was a hypochondriac. And in between that, my father, who was, from what I gather, a very sensitive child, had harsh discipline from his father, manipulation from his mother, no affirmation from either of them. And he grew up with this mentality that he really had very little value. Now, he loved God and he became a pastor, and he knew God had called him to be a pastor when he was in his early 20s. He was a very shy person, a person that didn't really want to share his life with hardly anyone. He was diffident and shy and extremely introverted, had a lot of problems talking with other people. And here, this is a person that God called to be a pastor. And it just floored him. He just couldn't believe it. How could I become a minister and help other people when I know nothing, it's the idea. And his view all through life was that if he really praised someone in his family, they might become arrogant, proud. I don't think he ever really said that, but it came through because he did the opposite. When he thought when he thought I or my sister or my brother or some other family member, and this ended up extending even to my oldest children, if he thought that there should be some change in our lives, instead of lovingly coming aside and talking with us and trying to affirm it, he would send these letters, and then it became emails of all the biblical reasons why we should change all this stuff. And it was all couched in the terms of, I am concerned about you, but it came across as extremely judgmental. And why did this happen to him? Because his mother believed that if he were to have self-compassion and loving kindness towards himself, then he would get haughty and he would be self-indulgent. But self-compassion and self-kindness is not self-indulgence. Now, self-indulgence is, over the top, where you may be narcissistic, basically. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about allowing the truth of who we are with all of our imperfections to be looked at by our own self. And we give ourselves compassion. We let ourselves off the hook. We say to ourselves, I see that. I see that I'm feeling this way and I don't want to respond inappropriately. So I'm really going to take a look and accept that I'm feeling this way. And then maybe I can address it with balance. Another element is this idea that all of our emotions and all of the need for compassion in relationships is a common theme for all of humanity. We're not alone in this need. I'm not here in my home alone with the need for compassion from others and self-compassion. This is a common and totally universal aspect of humanity. When we look at it from the standpoint that here's something common to all of humankind, but if we look at it and say, well, I have these emotions and these problems and I'm in isolation and nobody else feels like I feel, then this is where the balance comes, because common humanity is a totally opposite to isolation as being a one of a kind that's the only person experiencing this. So self-compassion in this context means that I'm going to extend it to you because just as you need it, I need it. And I'm not going to sit here in isolation and say, I'm so terrible. I'm so awful. We used to have a little thing when we were kids, I'm so bad. I'm just going to go eat dirt. I don't know if that was a Midwestern thing. I don't know if anybody ever heard of that one before, but that just came to my mind. The third element here of looking at this is self-awareness versus over-identification. So this is the concept that if I'm aware of certain areas of my life that honestly don't work very well, or are attitudes, thought processes that have been incorporated in my life my entire life, and I just identify with those and I say things to basically inside my head, well, this is just the way I am. Everybody's just going to have to put up with it because this is just the way I am. I mean, I could just see somebody going, this is just the way I am. Just let me alone. When we over-identify with these emotions or with these concepts that we've incorporated into our life, so that we feel like we're just stuck with them. There's no other way out. There's no way to even view ourselves. We're over-identifying with those things. We're basically saying, that's my identity. That's who I am. And the truth is, that is not who we are. Those are emotions or thought processes that we learned as children through different aspects of our lives, through the different events that just basically set a pattern in our unconscious mind in motion. And we've never perhaps taken a hard look at them to say, wait a minute, let me unpack this. Why do I think like this? Why do I always react like that? Is this healthy or not? So these elements of self-compassion, of self-kindness versus self-indulgence, common humanity versus isolation, and self-awareness versus over-identification are three really deep areas to think about. Now let me move on to something that's maybe a little bit calming to the mind for right now. Another way of looking at the differences in our lives related to compassion are the yin and yang. The yin is the soft, comforting, soothing side of self-compassion. And tonight when we finish and we wrap up, we'll have a little bit of a self-compassion meditation in which I will share with you some methodologies of soothing yourself. So from a loving standpoint, we can validate ourselves, we can soothe ourselves, we can comfort ourselves. We need that sometimes. I know I need it. And then when we have this self-compassion, we can begin to extend that to others and to ourselves from the standpoint of protection and providing and motivating. We recognize that all these emotions that we have, the gamut from what are considered negative all the way to what are considered extremely positive, these are all universal. And we have emotions that help us center and help us be calm and feel comforted and soothed and protected. And we also have emotions that we protect ourselves, perhaps a little more ruthlessly and strongly. We protect others, we provide for others, and we feel that the pain of others and the angst and the suffering that they have. We feel our own suffering and we begin to find ways to alleviate that. If we don't alleviate our own suffering, how can we alleviate the suffering of someone else? Honestly, I honestly don't believe that we can reach out in true compassion and kindness to others if we're really always down on ourselves and kicking ourselves about something, or disappointed with ourselves, or judging our own way and who we are. This is not to say that we shouldn't change. Of course, we can transform ourselves. Life is a journey of change. But at the same time, let's be kind to ourselves in this journey. We can look at the emotions that we have and label them, say, let me be honest, what is this emotion? Why am I feeling this? We can validate and accept these feelings with compassion, understanding. We can engage with them and respond to ourselves. What are these powerful emotions I'm having, and where did they come from? Why do I always go there? And then we can cultivate some positive feelings associated with this self-compassion that we create within ourselves. Scientifically, we all want to find ways to make our brain and our body and our mind happier, don't we? The pursuit of happiness. What is the Constitution, or maybe it's a preamble, says, this is a God-given right to pursue happiness. I really prefer the word joy, but happiness is that feeling that things are just great right now. And some people are on a almost a power trip, or they're tripping to always want to be happy, always want to find things to keep themselves happy. There are pleasure circuits in our brains. We know that we have dopamine, we have serotonin, and there are pleasure circuits in our brain. One of the pleasure circuit things for me is to have a piece of chocolate. Just love chocolate mint, like York mint patties. They're the best. It's my mother's favorite, and I grew up with those being the favorite candy. So they get those, to have even one small little tiny piece out of a junior mint just gives me this dopamine pleasure like crazy. But can I, every time I want to activate this feeling, should I just be eating lots of York mint patties? I don't think so. But they have found that the pursuit of compassion, when we pursue compassion, self-compassion, compassion for others, we actually affect that same circuitry with a pleasant feeling, with dopamine, with feeling happier about our relationships and what we're all about. So if we want to create a pathway to happiness, we need to we need to cultivate a compassionate mindset. There's a lot of work being done about mindset right now. I know that you, Melanie, are hearing that word a lot in your work. You know, what's your mindset? You got to have a business mindset. You got to have a growth mindset, a motivational mindset. You can do it mindset. There's mindsets all over. Believe that the universe is going to give this to you because you have all this positive energy and it's going to just come to you. And I know I sound like I'm scoffing at this, and I'm really not, because I don't believe that this nebulous universe is going to do this, but God can do it, you know. But that's just me. I mean, a lot of people believe a lot of different things on that, but to cultivate this compassionate mindset, we need to do several things. We can be present, which we've been talking about for the last 2 days, aware, listening to others. We can suspend judgment. That's a hard one. Suspend judgment about other people. I was thinking about that today and realized that just some little tiny thing had happened here, and my mind immediately went to judgment. I'm like, oh my God, stop this, Cynthia. You know, I mean, we're just geared that way. It's like we grow up with people making comments about other people all the time, and we're just sucked into that judgment. Third thing on this pathway to happiness is to be inspired to help others. Fourth, respond to emotions rather than words. That's a big one. How many times have you responded to the words you heard somebody say? Your mind interpreted them in a split second, and then your emotions took over and you reacted, and then you finally calmed down enough to say that again? What did you say? Could you unpack that for a minute? Because I think I didn't get it. Right? Because the words often just trigger something within us. I call those ghosts. I don't know if that resonates with you, but I had a lot of difficult things growing up and a very difficult first marriage, horrendous in many ways. And there are things that happened in my life that got very buried. And then something along the way would happen, some little tiny situation that, rather than responding to this situation that was actually happening or the words that were said, this ghost came up out of my spirit, out of my subconscious, and choked me. And I was just responding to old stuff. I mean, really, really old stuff. And reacting to something that another person was just dumbfounded, just like, what's going on? This makes no sense. You're just like over the top here. What did I do? And then I realized, well, they actually didn't do anything. It was just all this video in my head. Those are really not happy times when that happens. So we don't need to respond to words. We need to just respond to the actual emotion that's there and look at it as an emotion only. We need to look for commonalities with those around us. And I know in business, both of you and I and others that we know are always looking for commonalities. How do we build relationships with people? A commonality, do you have same values? Are you on the same track? Do you maybe have similar things in your family? or something that draws us to one another. But when we look for commonalities with others, and particularly from the standpoint of compassion, then we can work on developing that compassionate mindset. And another thing we can do is recollect. I like that old word, recollect. Remember the times that we have received compassion from someone else, when we didn't maybe deserve that compassion, or we didn't expect the compassion. We weren't sure that anyone was going to give us any compassion, and we weren't very compassionate for ourselves, but someone reached out and showed us some loving kindness and compassion. When we reflect on these things, bring them to mind, to recollect, it helps us cultivate this pathway to happiness. Number 7 is to overlook or extend grace to those who mistreat us. I've often thought that my mother, and I apologize for bringing her up so much, but I'm right in the time of my life and spending a lot of time with her and reflecting a lot about her life and what she's meant to me and to many others. She developed a really strong principled approach to being tolerant and kind to people, and overlooking, she overlooked the faults, she overlooked the mistreatment, and she extended grace. She became a master at it. I mean, she's still doing it over in the nursing home. People might come in there to work with her, CNA that, is just having a rough day, and she's a little gruff and she's kind of impatient. And my mother just smiles at her and does her best and does not hold it against her. At 84 years old, with her little bit of dementia, she still is who she is. She made it a strong value and habit to overlook those who might mistreat her, to overlook those sins against her. And the last one, number 8, is to focus on the size. Oh, I'm sorry. Do not focus on the size of the issue at hand. Perhaps there's an altercation or just an intense discussion with someone, and what do we automatically do? We assume the negative, we blow it out of proportion, we say, this is horrible, you never do this, you always do that, everything is over the top size. And when we finally calm down and come back to ourselves, we can realize that, this was just not that important in the grand scheme of things. So what, But what do? We just focused on the size of this. It's just so bad. So bad. So those are 8 ways to cultivate a pathway to happiness. And I know you can't write those all down really fast, and eventually I'll get all these out there so everyone can see them. So I have one little section more that I wanted to talk about, and that is self-care and self-compassion for someone specifically who is in the throes of being a family caregiver. And I know you both have been, as I have been, and others who are watching this have been and are in the throes of this journey of the ups and downs, the good days, the bad days, the times when we're afraid something terrible has happened, the times when we're frustrated, all of those ups and downs. And in this context of compassion, I'd like to give you a little definition of a caregiver. I believe this is a person who provides from within and from their grace and their compassion the space, the time, and the energy to support the healing or the care for this loved one. The space, the time, and the energy. Now that may resonate with you. You may interpret that in a different way than I might in my situation. But I encourage you to look at yourself as a person who has and is and will give space and time and energy to support and lovingly alleviate the suffering of another person. This all comes to compassion. And we can do this for ourselves too. There was a young woman who I believe joined Tribecarians or was planning to. I'm not sure exactly where she communicated this to me, but she wrote to me and she said, I'm not a family caregiver. I do have a child and I'm married, but I'm really here caregiving myself right now. And I think from the standpoint that when we care for ourselves, when we extend this compassion to ourselves, we're going to allow ourselves space to fail, space to be, space to be nurtured and soothed, space to be energized. We're going to give ourselves time. We're going to give ourselves energy. I realized last night that I was really low on energy. The first night, I stayed up till 2 a.m. fiddling with the videos, trying to figure out how to upload them to Facebook and to YouTube and all this stuff. Then I went to bed and I was like, whoa, I'm really wiped out here. And so last night, even though I believe I shared something that was very important, I did not feel a lot of energy. So I did some things today to make sure I had more energy tonight. I gave myself some space just to do some self-care. I gave myself time without self-care and time to reflect. And I honestly, before we got started, I was doing some exercises and swinging my arms and energizing my body because I realized that if, I just felt lethargic. I felt tired. So as a caregiver, we're on this journey and we need space, time, and energy, and our loved ones need space, time, and energy. Sometimes maybe they need us and maybe they don't, sometimes I know I did this myself. I felt like I could do everything. I didn't need anybody else to help. I'm the large and in charge big sister. But the mindset of a caregiver has to be that we can't go it alone. We really have to have other support. Some situations end up being that a person goes it alone. There just is no help available. Have had very little help available to me, but those that have been able to help at different times have made a difference. But we could feel that to reach out for help or insist that other family members step up to the plate and understand that this is important might seem like that's a weakness. Maybe we should just do this ourselves. But I think it really is a strength to recognize our own limitations, give ourselves the time and space, and be willing to share the load with others if it's at all possible, even if it means that we have to share that load with a professional. There is no greater honor that could be bestowed on us than to be entrusted with the care of another human being. No greater honor. Sometimes women are entrusted with the care of a human being that's their own child, that's a newborn. Sometimes we're entrusted with the care of a human being that just comes into our life and needs help, and they're there for a short period of time and then they're gone. In my case, I was entrusted with the care of 2 tiny little human beings. I was in South America and I learned of twins that were preemies that one of the other missionaries had brought down to the city of Santa Cruz, Bolivia, from a tiny little town way up in the mountains. They were close to death. They were only about 7 months premature, 3.5 pounds, not far from death. Someone else took care of them for a couple of days. I went to see them, held them in my arms like this. When they were about 12 to 14 inches, so I could put their head right there and their feet right there, and just held them like this. They were so tiny. And I fell in love with those babies. First day, those are my babies. I fought like tooth and nail. I mean, there was so much to go through for months to save their lives, to see them grow, to become healthy, to figure out all the legal stuff to be able to keep them. It was a battle. It was a long, hard battle. And there were times when we were especially um, exercised thinking that maybe we weren't going to be able to do it. Very, very hard. But I was entrusted with their lives. And now, about 2 weeks ago, they turned 37 years old. Those lives and their children and their lives now are a direct result of my choosing to hear God and hear my heart to take those children and love them. I know that's an extreme story. It's really out of the box, but that's just part of my journey. But we have no greater honor in our lives than to be entrusted with caring and helping another human being. We live in a world where this common need and the common humanity is many times diminished to a great extent. There's terrible things going on in this world, and always have been. But in the context of our lives, when we extend to ourselves compassion and care and loving kindness, we're able to extend that loving kindness to others in our circle of acquaintances, in our family, in our friends. And honestly, we can extend the power of that loving kindness throughout the world when we are willing to do our part, when we're willing to touch lives as we all are. Not just in business, not just so that people are successful in business, but touch their lives on some little bit of a personal level, not intrusively, but trusting that we can impact someone else with compassion and loving kindness. So tonight, as we wrap up, as we've done the last 2 nights, I want to share with you just a brief meditation. And if you would like to just relax in your chair and close your eyes, I'd encourage you to do this. Last night when I did this, I was sitting here closing my eyes too. So let's just begin by breathing normally, considering our lives for a moment, and placing one or both of your hands on your heart or your stomach, on your chest, or you can gently rest a hand on your opposite shoulder, like, somebody's just going to pat your shoulder, just a gentle touch. Anything that feels soothing to you. For me, I like to put my left hand on my heart. And sometimes I put my right hand on my face because there's something about the touch on my face, on my cheek, that's soothing to me. As you breathe normally, just relax and notice the warmth and that slight pressure of your touch of your hand. Bring your attention to what that feels like. What does it feel like for your own hand, the light pressure of your hand, to just rest lightly on your chest or on your heart? Notice the sensations that are present within you. Allow your awareness to rest on this touch of your hand. And as you do that, bring part of your awareness to the flow of your breathing. Take a few slow, even breaths, whatever pace feels comfortable to you. I'm going to quietly read a few phrases that represent the elements of self-compassion for emotions. And I'd like to encourage you to repeat them to yourself either silently or even whispering them if you'd prefer. In this moment, I'm feeling, and then say in your mind what you're feeling. For me, it's in this moment, I'm feeling joy and peace. So in this moment, I am feeling, it makes sense that I'm feeling this emotion and expressing it because I am human. It makes sense that I'm experiencing this emotion because I am human. May I be filled with self-compassion and take care of myself. May I accept myself and my experiences. May I be loving toward myself. May I be gentle with myself. May I be wise. May I be understanding. May I be strong and willing to be with this experience of this emotion. May I be courageous and committed to myself and to others. Just take a moment and rest in these thoughts. Rest in the thought of loving yourself, of being gentle to yourself, of being strong, courageous, wise, accepting of yourself and your experiences. As you relax into that, feel free to wiggle around a little bit and come back to yourself and your environment. And I hope that you're able to take this thought away with you tonight of being compassionate with yourself, having compassion for your own self, for your family, for others, knowing that the Spirit will comfort you and strengthen you in this. God bless you all. Thank you. And good night.